Now we have to render out our actual images and then take them into Photoshop and manipulate them slightly. We're going to put the skin and the skull image together and tidy them up, and we'll wind up with something like this, where we have the skull superimposed over the black silhouette of the skin, some vignetting around here to hide the edge of our render where it cuts off, or where the actual specimen was cut off, and then a few things to clean up the image and scaling them down. In this case, we're going to scale these down to 50% their actual size for the layout that we'll put together later on in Illustrator. So let's go back to to Maya, and we'll start somewhere like this. Now we're not going to get this to actual scale when we render. We'll have to fix it in Photoshop like we have done in the past. But we want to make sure all the render settings are correct. And let me just look through here to make sure. So clicking on the render settings button here, on our common tab, we're rendering to letter size. Now the quality we can change here. I was experimenting with different values. You can try out 1 and see if it takes. We're only rendering out 1 frame, so even if it takes a little while, that's fine. But if the system hangs, then you can lower this down to something like 0.5 and try. Now, in the previous video, I had this turned on to Final Gather. I noticed that I actually may have accidentally turned it on to GI Prototype. That was incorrect. It should be on Final Gather for the render. And we've already created our image-based lighting. So that's good. And now we're going to render from the lateral view now, because we have the lighting set up for that. And remember, if we hit 7 on the keyboard, then we'll go into lighting mode to get a preview. So I'll just render this out. Okay, so that took about a minute to render on my computer. It'll probably take a little longer on yours. You'll see there are some things like part of the vertebral column is still here. We're going to get rid of that in Photoshop rather than trying to do that here. So we'll save this file out. Save it as a TIFF. I've already done it, so I would just name it something. Save it as a TIFF file. Don't hit cancel, hit save. And then we will do the skin from this view. Now it's important that we don't move our camera between these two renders. We don't change our view here by accident. If you ever do move your camera by accident, let's say I accidentally moved out like that, if you just hit the square left bracket, it will pop you back to your last camera position. So now we'll render this one out. This one should be a little faster since it's just black. Okay, that's done. Just took under 20 seconds. And we will so lateral skin as a TIFF, hit save. And now you can do the same thing from this view, making sure everything fits within the resolution gate. Of course, before I do this, I have to move the lights around. So looking in here, moving the light over, you can see how the light is changing. So we want an upper left-hand light. Make sure we're showing off the form. I'll take my fill light, move it forward to fill in the under the mandible here a little bit. I want to tuck this one up. I don't want to have it too bright. Just want a little bit of reflected light in there. And don't forget that the Final Gather is going to take care of softening that dark shadow for us a bit. So I'll have to do some render tests to see. So I'm just going to do a quick render here. So I stopped the render early before it was finished. I just hit escape on the keyboard just because I think my reflected light is maybe a little too strong in here. So I'm going to fix it without waiting. Go back to my perspective view so I can move it. I just want to maybe move it back a little bit. Just want to get a little bit of light in there. Oops, deselected it by accident. You don't want to get rid of your core shadow too much. You need that core shadow to see form. So I'm just trying to find a good position for it where it's not filling in too much. It's just showing some feeling of reflected light. So maybe something like that. That's too far to the side. Don't want to get too much of this in here. Maybe something like this. Let's try this one again. Let's click on render. So that's looking pretty good. Just as a reminder, under these two lights here, we've got our key light up here. And remember, use ray trace shadows is turned on for this one. For this one down here, if we open the attribute editor, we can see that emit specular is turned off. And use ray trace shadows is also turned off for this one. We want the top light to be casting shadows. The bottom light, we don't want to have casting shadows. We don't want it emitting specular light either. This is a total falsification. You couldn't create a light that doesn't emit specular. This is just a contrivance of the 3D environment. So the key light should have the shadows turned on, and the fill light at the bottom should have specular turned off. Scroll down here, use ray trace shadows turned off, and also you can see the intensity is lower. It's set to 0.2. So now we've got, well, we will have 4 renders: the side view with the skin and the bone, the front view with the skin and the bone. Saved out. And then we'll take these into Photoshop and see the next steps.